Welcome back. In our last lecture, we discussed how to get started writing first drafts. We talked about the importance of figuring out what kind of writing personality you have. Do you need to perfect the introduction before you can start to work on the rest of your essay? Or do you need to start in the middle with the meat of your argument and then tidy up the beginning and the ending later? Or are you like me? I'm someone who works best with the scattershot approach, throwing everything I think might be interesting or relevant to my topic up on the page, and then editing, rewriting, deleting, adding to, rearranging, until finally I've got a presentable piece of writing. We also talked last time about how daunting it can be to get started, and I gave you some tricks that have worked for me and for friends of mine to get past the initial writer's block. The thing that I found works best is to set a goal of a certain number of hours or a certain number of pages per day and give myself permission to stop after I've reached that point. Very often, when you know that there's a boundary around what you need to accomplish, something like, I need to get 3 pages written, or I need to work for 90 minutes, then it's easier to get started because the sooner you start, the sooner you will be done and you're able to go salsa dancing or out for a run or to a movie, or you can sit on the couch and watch Law & Order. In our last lecture, I probably also revealed that I'm a little nuts and kind of obsessive-compulsive when it comes to writing schedules. But I'm sure many of you out there right now understand you do what it takes to get the job done. Once I found the approach that worked for me, my progress on this huge writing project was steady and mostly satisfying. The day after I handed in my thesis, I woke up, poured myself a cup of coffee, I sat down at the computer, I noted the time on a slip of paper, and then suddenly I realized that I had nothing I needed to do. But what's important is that I was ready. I was in a kind of writing habit, and getting into that kind of habit can also really help your productivity. Now, many people find that writing an essay or letter or other piece of text is such a challenging and draining process that when they reach the end, they're relieved and they just want to get the thing out of their sight. So they hand it in or they mail it off almost immediately. And if they've waited until the last minute to work on this assignment, then often there's really no choice. I regularly have students come into class 5 minutes late on the day a paper is due. They may have stayed up all night finishing it, or they may have gotten up early to write the concluding paragraph, but what they put into my hands is assuredly hot off the printer, and almost as assuredly, it has not been edited. This is a major error, and it's one that we've all been guilty of making, yours truly included, but it very often means the difference between an A and a B, or a persuasive letter that gets read and makes someone stop and think, as opposed to one that simply gets filed or put into the recycle bin. One more time, I'm going to emphasize how important it is to give yourself plenty of time. I know it's not always possible. Sometimes you will have to write something that is both first and final draft at 4 a.m., and you have to hope that you do a good enough job to get by. It happens to all of us. Now, your goal should be to try and have this happen only very rarely, and the more you practice, the better those occasional 4 a.m. pieces of writing are going to be. Now, while getting the darn thing written certainly feels like the biggest part of any portion of the writing process, editing is arguably just as important, and in some cases, it's more important than the actual writing itself. Because this stage is so crucial and can make the difference between a piece of writing that's okay and one that's actually great, I have reminded you over and over and over again to give yourself the opportunity to put a piece of writing aside, even if it's just for an hour, and then come back and look at it with fresh eyes. When it comes to editing, there are 2 basic models at extreme opposite ends of the spectrum. There's the line-by-line approach, and then there's the holistic approach. A line-by-line approach is just what it sounds like. You start with the first line of the piece, You read through it and each successive line as carefully as possible, and you make revisions in the moment. So you fix the phrasing, the word choice, etc., sentence by sentence. The holistic approach is about stepping back from the work and taking what we call a macroscopic rather than microscopic view. And you can ask some questions about the piece. What is it trying to say? How does it say it? This approach then would start with sort of moving or changing or rearranging larger chunks of the paper. And then you'd gradually work down to the level of word choice and punctuation. Most people tend to use a combination of these approaches. And in this lecture, we're going to explore how to best use elements from each editing style to identify serious and not so serious problems with a piece of writing, and then how to get ready to polish it to perfection. So for today, let's consider the classic example of the 5-paragraph essay. And for this exercise, I've gone back to Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, and we've talked about it quite a bit in this course. So you probably have some idea about the plot, about how the text works, the kind of narrator we're dealing with, even if you haven't read this story yourself. But just as a quick reminder, it's a short story told in the first person as if we're reading the main character's journal. And we gather from the opening entries of the journal that the woman who's writing down these words is experiencing some sort of nervous breakdown. She's been ordered to rest, and she finds herself spending the summer at a large estate where she's ordered to do essentially nothing. And under the strain of not being allowed to perform even enjoyable tasks, she gradually goes insane, hallucinating all kinds of strange things, especially in relationship to the ugly yellow wallpaper in her room. All right, so let's imagine that a teacher has assigned you the task of writing a 5-paragraph essay on the yellow wallpaper. This structure, the 5-paragraph structure, is sort of the classic example of academic and argumentative writing. And while it's certainly not the ideal form for every writing task you might have, if we study it today, I think it works well to demonstrate how the editing process can work. And the idea with a 5-paragraph essay would be that you have an introductory paragraph, then you have 3 paragraphs of supporting evidence, and then you've got a concluding paragraph that sums up your argument. So I'm going to give you a really short example of a 5-paragraph essay so we can work with this form a little bit. And as I'm reading this, you might want to think to yourself, can I identify what the main goal of this piece of writing is? What are the points that support it? Where do I get confused or lost? And I should note also that reading aloud is another one of the best ways to check your writing for errors. Very often when you read something aloud, this helps you to spot a mistake that your eye might just skip over if you're reading silently to yourself. As you listen, you may notice that when I'm reading passages from this 5-paragraph essay, I'm making some mistakes, particularly in terms of grammar, maybe, or sentence structure. And what I'm doing here is reading the piece exactly as the student originally wrote it, errors and all. So that's maybe why it will sound a little awkward here and there. So here's the first paragraph. Quote, "The Yellow Wallpaper is a story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman about how a woman goes crazy. We read the story as if we are reading her journal, and this is how we learn that she is going mad. The readers can see that she's losing her grip on reality because she describes things that can only be hallucinations. But Charlotte's story isn't really about going crazy. It's about how women in her day were considered inferior to men." Okay, that's paragraph 1, in which the author is trying to introduce us to his subject and his argumentative position concerning it. From there, he moves on to paragraph 2, which should contain his first piece of supporting evidence. And here is paragraph 2. The story starts with us reading the narrator's journal, and we learn that she's living in a house out in the country. From her journal, we learn she's having some sort of nervous breakdown. She writes, quote, If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there is really nothing the matter with one but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do? My brother is also a physician and also of high standing, and he says the same thing. So I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics, and air, and exercise, and journeys, and am absolutely forbidden to work until I am well again." End quote. So from this passage, we learn the main character's basic situation. Okay, that's the second paragraph. Our writer here gives us a rather long quote that tells us something about the plot of the story, but really not much more. And as I'm reading this, I'm already starting to wonder, does the writer have a clear progression of his paper, or is he simply going to describe the narrative from the beginning to the end? When you're writing something like this, plot summary is certainly necessary to a certain extent, but you always need to be sure that your plot summary or your quotes are working in the interest of a larger argument. What this paragraph should be doing is making clear the first point that works in support of the author's argument as he laid it out in the introduction. Can you even remember what that point is now? Let's see if you can recall it. If not, you're not alone, and we'll talk about why that is in a moment. The paragraph following this one I just read to you should elaborate the second supporting point. Here's the writer's third paragraph. Charlotte's story really gets interesting when she describes the bedroom where the narrator is staying. Her description starts off very positively. It's a, quote, "big airy room with windows that look all ways and air and sunshine galore," end quote. But then the description gets more ominous. The narrator tells us that the ripped wallpaper is incredibly ugly. Quote, "The color is repellent, almost revolting, a smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow turning sunlight. It is a dull yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulfur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long." End quote. It becomes clear as we as readers continue to read that this bedroom of the narrator is not really a playroom or nursery, but more like a prison. Charlotte is suggesting that her husband has put her in prison. Okay, so that's paragraph 3. And again, it's a paragraph with a long quote in it. Now, quotes can often work in the interest of supporting your points. They function as concrete evidence that work to prove what you're trying to say. But all too often, I see students including quotes as if they're just trying to fill up space. And then there's very little commentary or discussion of the quote. You cannot simply find a quote that works to support your main claim, plug it into the paper, and then just leave it there as if your reader is going to figure out how it fits. Remember the example I gave you of the prosecutor in the Law and Order episode just pointing to the murder weapon and not explaining how it connects? If you're going to use a quote, it's the same thing. You must discuss it. A good rule of thumb is that if you are including a quote of 3 lines, you should spend at least an equal number of lines explaining why that quote is important. This third paragraph also concludes with a statement about how the room in the story seems to be something other than what it is. Now, the student writer is onto something here, but he doesn't really develop this point fully. Why is it important that we understand that there is some mystery about the room and its hideous wallpaper? And what's more important, how does that connect back to the writer's main claim? And can we remember what it is? The main claim was that this story is really about gender issues. With every supporting point you make in a piece of writing like this, you need to be sure that you explicitly connect it back to your main claim. Now, another mistake is that this student writer immediately seems to conflate or confuse Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the author of the story, with the narrator who is the main character of the story. Although it's clear that Gilman drew on her own experiences to write this text, this is fiction. It's not autobiography. So instead of saying Charlotte is suggesting that her husband has put her in prison, it would be better to say something like, Gilman seems to suggest that the narrator's husband has put her in prison. And you'll notice also that it's more correct to use the author's last name, Gilman, rather than to call her Charlotte, as if she happens to be the writer's good friend. Okay, so let's move on to the fourth paragraph of the essay. As we reach the end of Charlotte's story, we see that the narrator has gone insane. She tells us in her journal that she sees a woman behind the pattern of the wallpaper who is trying to get out. She writes, quote, "Sometimes I think there are a great many women behind, and sometimes only one, and she crawls around fast, and her crawling shakes it all over, and she is all the time trying to climb through, but nobody could climb through that pattern. It strangles so." End quote. She goes on to say that she now believes the woman has escaped, and she can see her outside, quote, "creeping about." The writing at the end of the story gets more and more disjointed as the narrator jumps from idea to idea and continues describing the yellow wallpaper in greater and more horrific detail. She clearly has become totally insane. Okay, that's paragraph 4. Again, the writer gives us a quote. It's a good instinct. The quote helps support a point, but what is the point exactly? Well, the paragraph seems to be offering evidence that the narrator's gone insane. But if we think back to the opening of the paper, the intro paragraph seemed to be trying to suggest that this story is really not about insanity. Instead, it's about gender. Has the writer forgotten what his main claim was? At this point, the answer seems to be yes. And if this writer is planning on turning the paper in as it is, then you can be pretty sure the grade isn't going to be very good. A first draft that is also a final draft almost never is. Okay, so if this is a 5-paragraph essay, we've got 1 paragraph to go. Let's see if the writer's going to try and save it. Here's what he wrote. In conclusion, we can see that although the insanity is the most obvious issue in Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, the more important issue is that of gender inequality. The narrator goes mad because she's been ordered to rest and not exert herself, even in activities that she likes. These decisions are made by men, her husband and her brother. And by the end of the story, we can see that the idea of the woman trapped behind the wallpaper functions as a metaphor for the narrator's own life. What do we make of this conclusion? Well, you can tell that the writer has obviously suddenly remembered that he was supposed to be writing about gender, not insanity. And in the space of a few sentences, he makes some claims that it's men who have decreed the narrator rest, that the woman that the narrator sees in the wallpaper in some way symbolizes herself, and these claims are the start of a really good argument. Unfortunately, it's too little too late. And while this paper does have some good parts, it does not hang together as a coherent, persuasive whole. Now, if this were a first draft, I would say this is great. The introduction understands that it's an introduction. The conclusion tries to conclude things. And in between, you have the start of what is an argument that uses individual points. But as a final draft, really not so great. It wanders. The quotes don't necessarily advance the argument as it's stated in the intro, and there's an imbalance between plot summary and argument. Way too much plot summary, not enough explanation or analysis of the quotes to make it rise to the level of an argument that's going to persuade someone. So if we consider the range of editing approaches we discussed briefly at the beginning of this lecture, we should try to figure out which approach is going to be most helpful in turning what's a rather mediocre attempt into a compelling piece of writing. So in this case, do you think it makes more sense to edit line by line or more holistically? I'm guessing with an example like this, most of you would say the holistic approach. Now, it's kind of hard for us to do this if you don't have the written paper in front of you, but we're going to try and work through it so that you can at least get some sense of how you might go about starting the editing process. Okay, the holistic approach. When you're taking this approach, the first thing you should do after reading through the essay is to try and state in a sentence or phrase what the main goal or argument of this essay is. And a good way to check for this in your own writing is to try and underline your main claim. And ideally, your main claim should be stated somewhere near the end of the first paragraph. If it's a longer piece of writing, First paragraph might be introductory, while the second states the main lines of your argument. But no matter what, the reader should be able to figure out by the second paragraph what it is you're really trying to say. If you can't figure out what to underline, then you know you have a problem, and you need to find a way to rephrase your main point or thesis. So in a nutshell, whether you're writing a magazine article or a letter or a report for work, your reader should be able to tell almost immediately what the main point is. You would be surprised how many people try to write without having clearly articulated what their main idea is, even in their own minds. I've seen a letter to the editor of our local paper begin by stating something like, "Government is becoming too intrusive in people's lives." And after this statement, there was a list of excessive restrictions on the rights of local citizens. Then the letter ended by condemning the recent city council decision not to allow people living within city limits to raise chickens. Only with the final sentence was the main point of the letter clear. As it stood, the letter came across as a rant by a person with a whole lot of upset feelings, but no clear idea for organizing them in a fashion that would make an impact. We've already established that the main idea in this essay is pretty clear. The writer says in the first paragraph that insanity is an important element of the yellow wallpaper, but gender is actually more important. The key for this paper to be strong and organized is for the writer to make every supporting point connect back explicitly to this main claim. So our next step in trying to determine how well or poorly this essay connects back to that claim would be to try and write up an outline of the paper as it stands now. And again, this doesn't have to be formal outline style. You don't have to do Roman numeral 1, capital A, all that nonsense. But you can do that if that's what you're used to and that's what you like. For me, I find the easiest thing to do is just take a blank sheet of paper and write a sentence or a couple of phrases for each paragraph. So, given how the essay stands now, my outline on the page might look something like, Paragraph 1, Intro. Yellow wallpaper seems to be about insanity, really about men treating women as inferiors. Paragraph 2, Plot Summary. We learn narrator is in country house for nervous condition. There's a quote about how her husband and brother both agree this is what she needs. Story is told through her journal entries. Paragraph 3. Description of the ugly yellow wallpaper and how her bedroom seems like a prison. Writer suggests that narrator's husband has put her in prison. Paragraph 4. Narrator has gone completely insane. Believes she can see a woman behind the pattern of the wallpaper. Paragraph 5. Conclusion. Argues that preceding examples show how this story is about men dominating women because husband and brother have prescribed this regimen, and woman in the wallpaper symbolizes the narrator's confinement. All right, so very quickly then, we've identified the basic structure of the paper. And if we look at it a little bit closer, you can see where it might fall apart. And again, it's always a good idea to try and sum up in 1 or 2 sentences what each supporting point is and then how it supports the main idea. And again, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that each supporting point connects back to your main claim as clearly and emphatically as possible. Never assume that just because you see how the quote you've selected makes a connection, your readers are going to get it as well. Now, I know it's been several minutes since you heard me read the intro paragraph aloud, but you're probably remembering there were some awkward stylistic moments. It didn't flow very well, there were some typos or misused words. We're just going to file that information away. We're not going to worry about finer details here. We're trying to fix the overall structure of the paper. So we've already established that the introductory paragraph does a pretty good job of stating the main claim. Stories about insanity. And this writer thinks Charlotte Perkins Gilman really is mostly concerned with gender. That's a decent argumentative claim. But as it stands, the intro paragraph could be more specific. What 3 points exactly support this argumentative claim? In the intro paragraph, at least give us a hint. Okay, so We'll come back to the intro paragraph. Let's review our outline and look at paragraph 2. It included some plot summary and a quote about how the narrator's husband and brother said this is what she needed. Now, here's a prime opportunity for the writer to make an explicit connection. The quote shows how male figures join together to make a female figure do something she would rather not. However, the writer never points this out explicitly. We can infer this if we read the quote carefully, and we can connect the dots on our own. But the writer ends the paragraph by telling us that, quote, now we know the basic situation. And like I've said before, it seems as if the writer has already forgotten what his own main claim was. Okay, so as we've noted in our outline, paragraph 3 gives us a quote describing the yellow wallpaper. This is obviously critically important. The story, after all, is called The Yellow Wallpaper. And the writer of this essay also makes the statement that the narrator's husband has essentially put her in prison. But if you look at the quote, it's really about how ugly the wallpaper is, and it's not about prison. Now, the writer does mention here that the narrator's description of the room makes it sound ominous, like a prison. But he doesn't show any evidence of that. So what we can figure out is that paragraph 3 seems to be trying to make use of 2 possible pieces of evidence. And these would be 1, the prison-like quality of the room, and 2, the extreme ugliness of the ripped wallpaper. But because they're put together when maybe they should be separated into their own paragraphs, each of the points isn't made as clearly and effectively as it might be. So as our outline shows, paragraph 4 describes how the narrator seems to have gone completely insane because she believes she can see a woman behind the pattern of the wallpaper. Again, the author of this essay seems to have forgotten that his main claim is really about gender inequality. He just seems to be giving us plot summary. Paragraph 5, the conclusion, is clearly an attempt on the part of the author of this essay to bring us back to the main point of the introduction. And he's sort of retroactively suggesting that what the writer has just described proves that the yellow wallpaper is about gender inequality. So now we've identified some flaws in the broad outline of the paper. Let's try and revise the outline. And again, we're just going to do this in the general, broadest sense we can so that we can think about how we can move on and make the paper stronger. As I've said before, in general, the first paragraph seems to be okay, although it needs some fine-tuning. But the major point of the essay is clear. But now that we've been thinking and reading on this topic for a while, we need to come up with 3 paragraphs that each support that main claim about gender inequality. And if you're trying to do this on a sheet of paper, you might scribble something like, Paragraph 2, the role and description of men in the story. Paragraph 3, the description of the narrator's bedroom as a prison. Paragraph 4, the yellow wallpaper itself and the image of the woman trapped behind it that the narrator imagines. Paragraph 5, conclusion, recap of main points, restatement of main claim. So here you see we've separated the 2 claims that were together in paragraph 3, the 2 points, and we've given them each their own paragraph. So now that we've dealt with the larger sweep of the paper, we can start to focus in on some of the details. As we rewrite, we want to make sure that it's absolutely clear how each point works to support the main claim. You want to make sure that the quotes you've selected actually do the work that you want them to do. Are there other quotes that might help you make your point a little bit better or a little more clearly? You might want to replace them now. And as you rewrite, you'll also want to check for awkward phrasing and out-and-out errors. In our next lecture, we'll get down to the business of rewriting this essay from start to finish, and then we'll practice the editing and rewriting process on a very different type of writing, a job letter. What we'll discover is how easily these editing and writing tools can translate from one type of prose to another.